I was working the front desk at a hotel in Amsterdam when an American couple walked up to me, looking absolutely panicked. The woman leaned over the counter and whispered like she was sharing state secrets. "We need to talk to the manager." "This is serious." I asked what happened. She looked around, then said, "There are bicycles everywhere outside, like hundreds of them. Just left there. We think someone's running a stolen bike operation out of your hotel." I blinked. Then I realized she was talking about the normal bike parking area that every building in Amsterdam has. I tried to explain that people just park their bikes there because that's how we get around. She wasn't having it. "But they're not locked up properly. Someone needs to call the police." Her husband nodded, like they'd just uncovered a major crime ring. I had to walk them outside and show them that literally every street corner looked like this. They seemed disappointed that there wasn't a mystery to solve. This is the kind of cultural disconnect I see constantly. And it's exactly what I unpack here every week. Real stories, real perspective, no stereotypes. If that's the kind of clarity you value, you'll want to stay tuned. Another guest that same week asked me where they could get American coffee. I pointed to the coffee machine in the lobby. "No, no," he said. "Real coffee. Like from Starbucks." I told him the nearest Starbucks was 2 blocks away. He frowned. "But why would anyone drink that fancy European stuff when they could have normal coffee?" I didn't know how to explain that the fancy European stuff was just regular coffee here, and Starbucks was the tourist option. My favorite was the guy who came down at midnight complaining that the city was too quiet. He said it was creepy that people weren't out partying on a Tuesday night. He actually asked if something bad had happened, like if there was a curfew we forgot to tell him about. I explained that Amsterdam just doesn't rage on weeknights in residential areas. He looked confused. "But I thought Europe was supposed to be fun. Working in tourism teaches you something fast." Some travelers expect the whole world to work exactly like home. And when it doesn't, they assume something's wrong with everyone else. I track patterns like this across cultures all the time. How small habits reveal big assumptions. If that kind of perspective shift interests you, this channel is built for you. Not in a mean way, usually. Just in a genuinely confused way that makes you realize how different normal can be, depending on where you grow up. And honestly, some of these culture clash moments are pure comedy gold. So let me take you through some of the wildest, funniest, most face-palm-worthy moments I've witnessed and collected from friends working across Europe, Asia, and beyond. These aren't mean-spirited stories. They're just reminders that confident confusion is a universal travel experience, and Americans sometimes take it to an art form. My cousin works at a car rental place in Munich. An American tourist came in asking for a vehicle that could drive to Paris for lunch and be back by dinner. My cousin pulled up a map and showed him that Paris was over 600 kilometers away. The guy laughed. "Right, but how far is that in real distance?" My cousin said, "About 8 hours of driving." The tourist's face fell. "Wait, I thought Europe was small. Like, I thought Germany and France were basically neighbors." My cousin explained they were neighbors, but that doesn't mean they're 10 minutes apart. The guy genuinely seemed betrayed by European geography. He rented the car anyway, and definitely did not make it back for dinner. A teacher friend in London told me about an American exchange student who got confused during a science lesson. They were measuring things in centimeters, and the student raised her hand and asked, "When are we going to use real measurements?" The teacher asked what she meant. "You know, like inches and feet. The normal ones." The teacher gently explained that most of the world uses the metric system, and actually it's much simpler because everything's based on tens. The student looked around at the other kids like she was expecting backup. Nobody said anything. She slumped in her chair and muttered, "This is going to be harder than I thought." I had a guest in Amsterdam ask me how to convert Celsius to regular degrees. I told him the formula, but he wasn't interested in math. He just wanted to know if 60 degrees Celsius meant he should bring a jacket. I explained that 60 Celsius is boiling hot, like dangerously hot. And if it ever got that warm outside, we'd all be in serious trouble. He checked his weather app, which was set to Fahrenheit, and got even more confused. Eventually, I just told him to bring a light jacket and he'd be fine. He came back later and said, "You were right, but I still don't trust your temperature system." A bartender in Barcelona told me about a customer who insisted Spain was in South America. Not like a joke. He was serious. She tried to correct him. He doubled down. "No, I'm pretty sure. You guys speak Spanish, right?" She said yes. "Exactly. Spanish is from South America." She explained that Spanish comes from Spain, which is in Europe, and that's why the language is called Spanish. He thought about it, then said, "Okay, but you're basically South American in spirit, though, right?" She just poured his drink and walked away. My friend worked at a train station in Belgium and had someone ask how long the train to Italy took. She said around 10 to 12 hours, depending on connections. The passenger looked shocked. "That can't be right. I looked at a map this morning. It's like 2 inches away." She had to explain that maps aren't drawn to scale based on American road trip logic. He kept insisting that it looked close, so it should be faster. Eventually, he bought the ticket, but spent the whole time before boarding complaining that European trains were slow. They're not. Geography is just bigger than it looks on a phone screen. A hostel manager in Prague told me about a guest who asked if they accepted real money, or just euros. The manager said Prague uses Czech crowns. The guest looked horrified. "Wait, you don't even use euros? How do you buy anything?" The manager explained that different countries have different currencies. The guest said, "But I thought Europe was all one thing." Technically, the EU exists, but not every country uses the euro, and even that takes explaining. The guest ended up using a credit card for everything and left a review saying Prague was complicated financially. I was giving directions to someone in Amsterdam who wanted to walk to a nearby museum. I told them it was about 15 minutes away. They asked how many blocks that was. I said we don't really measure distance in blocks here. They asked how far it was in feet. I said maybe a kilometer? They stared at me. "You seriously don't know how many feet that is?" I said most people here think in meters and kilometers. They sighed like I was being difficult on purpose. They pulled out their phone, converted it themselves, and then seemed offended that I made them do math on vacation. One of the funniest was a guest who asked me if the metric system was a European political thing. Like, they thought it was a statement against America. I tried to explain it's just a measurement system most of the world uses because it's easier. They weren't buying it. It feels intentional. I didn't know how to respond to that. I just said we've been using it for a really long time, long before anyone cared what America thought. They nodded slowly, still suspicious. A waiter in Rome told me about a customer who got genuinely upset that the restaurant didn't have ranch dressing. Not like mildly disappointed, actually upset. He asked for the manager. The manager came over. The customer said, "How do you not have ranch? What do people put on their salad?" The manager said olive oil and vinegar, which is traditional. The customer shook his head. "That's not going to work for me." He ended up ordering pizza and asking if they had ranch for that instead. They did not. He ate it plain and left a review saying the restaurant was unprepared for American guests. I had someone at my hotel ask where they could find a good breakfast spot that served normal food. I asked what they meant. They said, pancakes, bacon, eggs, hash browns. Real breakfast. I suggested a few cafes that do brunch. They came back an hour later saying everywhere only had bread and coffee. I explained that's a typical European breakfast. They looked heartbroken. "So everyone here just eats bread in the morning and that's it?" I mentioned pastries, cheese, fruit. They were unimpressed. "That's not breakfast. That's a snack." My friend who works at a cafe in Paris had a customer ask why they couldn't order their coffee to go in a huge cup. She explained they don't really do extra-large sizes here. He said, "But I need a lot of coffee." She offered him a double espresso. He looked at the tiny cup like she'd insulted him. That's not coffee. That's like a shot. She tried to explain that European coffee is stronger, so you don't need as much. He ended up ordering 4 espressos and pouring them into a water bottle he brought. She said it was the saddest thing she'd ever watched. The tipping situation causes so much confusion. A server in Berlin told me about a table that left a 50% tip and then hung around waiting for applause or something. When nobody reacted, they seemed confused. One of them asked if the tip was okay. The server said it was very generous but not necessary. They looked offended. So you don't want it? The server explained that in Germany, service is included, and 10% is considered nice if you want to leave extra. They took back half the tip. The server said it was the most awkward thing that ever happened to him. I had a guest complain that our restaurant was ignoring them. I went to check. They'd been sitting there for 10 minutes without ordering. I asked if they'd called the waiter over. They said no. We're waiting for him to come ask what we want. I explained that in many European restaurants, you signal when you're ready. They thought that was rude. So we have to flag him down like we're desperate? I said, it's just the system. They sat there another 10 minutes on principle before finally waving someone over. A friend in Copenhagen told me about customers who got upset that the waiter brought the bill without them asking. They thought he was trying to rush them out. He explained that in Denmark, the bill comes when you're done eating, but you can sit as long as you want. They didn't believe him. They paid quickly and left, then wrote a review saying the restaurant was pushy. My friend said it happens constantly. Someone at my hotel asked why restaurants in Amsterdam were so expensive. I explained that Dutch wages are higher, so eating out costs more. They said, but the food isn't fancy, it's just normal food. I tried to explain that labor costs get factored into prices. They couldn't get past it. In America, you can get a huge meal for like $8. I didn't mention that those workers are probably not getting paid much. They ended up eating at grocery stores most of the trip. A barista in Vienna told me, someone ordered a latte and then got mad when it came in a glass instead of a paper cup. They asked for it to be remade in something they could take with them. The barista explained that most cafes in Vienna expect you to sit and drink. The customer said, but I have things to do. The barista just stared. Eventually, they poured it into a to-go cup, but the customer left a bad review anyway, saying the cafe was inefficient. The weirdest food moment I witnessed personally was a guest who asked if we had a microwave they could use. I said we had one in the staff area, but it wasn't for guest use. They asked why not. I said most Europeans don't really use microwaves the same way Americans do. They looked horrified. How do you reheat food? I said stove or oven usually. They shook their head. That's so much work. Do you guys just eat everything cold? I promised we did not eat everything cold. They didn't seem convinced. My friend works at a library in Oslo. An American visitor got shushed by another patron for talking on his phone. He hung up, then loudly asked my friend, "Is that guy allowed to shush me?" She said yes. Libraries are quiet spaces. He said, "But I wasn't being loud." She said any phone conversation is considered loud in a Norwegian library. He seemed baffled. So everyone just sits here in silence? She nodded. He left 5 minutes later, saying it was too intense. A woman at my hotel asked why all the shops were closed on Sunday. I explained that in the Netherlands, most stores close on Sundays so workers can rest. She said, "But what if I need something?" I suggested planning ahead or finding a train station shop. She thought that was unreasonable. In America, everything's open all the time. I said that's a different system. She spent the rest of Sunday complaining about it. I had a guest knock on the front desk at 2 in the morning, asking where the nearest late-night diner was. I said we don't really have those here. He looked panicked. So, if I'm hungry right now, I just starve? I mentioned a few kebab shops that might still be open. He said, I don't want kebab. I want normal food. I didn't know what to tell him. He ended up eating vending machine snacks and left a review saying Amsterdam had no food culture. A teacher in Germany told me about an American student who wore shoes inside the classroom. Another student asked them to take their shoes off. The American said, "Why? It's not someone's house." The teacher explained that in Germany, many schools have indoor shoe policies to keep floors clean. The American argued that it was weird and uncomfortable. The teacher said they could follow the rule or sit in the hallway. They took off their shoes but complained the entire semester. Someone asked me why Dutch people were so blunt. I asked what happened. They said a local told them their question was silly. I asked what the question was. They'd asked a stranger on the street if Amsterdam was in Holland or the Netherlands. The stranger said, "That's the same thing. You could Google that." The guest thought that was rude. I explained that Dutch culture values directness. They said, "Yeah, but there's a polite way to be direct." I said from a Dutch perspective, that was polite. A friend in Switzerland had a guest complain about noise rules. The guest wanted to vacuum their apartment at 10 at night. A neighbor knocked and asked them to stop. The guest said, "It's my apartment. I'll clean whenever I want." The neighbor explained that quiet hours are between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. The guest said that was ridiculous. My friend had to step in and confirm that yes, Swiss buildings have strict noise rules and you can actually get fined for breaking them. The guest vacuumed at 9 p.m. the next night out of spite. I watched someone get confused at a crosswalk in Amsterdam. The light was red, but no cars were coming, so they started to cross. A local yelled at them to wait. They yelled back, "There's no cars." The local said, "The light is red." They argued back and forth until the light turned green. The American muttered, "People here follow rules like robots." I didn't mention that jaywalking fines exist and that local was probably trying to help. A hostel worker in Portugal told me about a guest who threw a party in their dorm room at midnight on a Wednesday. Other guests complained. The host asked them to keep it down. They said, "We're on vacation. We're allowed to have fun." The host explained that other people are also on vacation and trying to sleep. They turned the music down for 10 minutes, then back up. They got kicked out the next morning and left a review saying the hostel was no fun allowed. Someone at my hotel asked why everyone biked so slow in Amsterdam. I said people bike at normal city speeds here. They said, "But I'm from New York. I walk faster than these people bike." I explained that bikes share the road with pedestrians and other bikes, so you can't just speed around. They said it defeated the purpose of biking. I suggested they walk if they wanted to go faster. They didn't appreciate the suggestion. A guest asked me why their Uber was taking so long. I checked their app. They were trying to get picked up from a canal-side street that cars can't access. I explained they'd need to walk to a main road. They said, "Can't the driver just figure it out?" I said no, because it's physically impossible for a car to drive there. They seemed annoyed that Amsterdam wasn't designed for rideshare apps. The funniest daily life clash I saw was someone asking why grocery stores in the Netherlands didn't have baggers. I said people bag their own groceries here. They said, "That's what I pay the store for." I explained that's not how it works in Europe. They stood at the register waiting for someone to bag their stuff. The cashier just stared. Eventually, another customer offered to help. They accepted, but said the whole system was backwards. I could keep going for hours. These stories never stop. Every week, there's a new one that makes me shake my head and laugh at the same time. And look, I want to be clear about something. None of this is about Americans being bad travelers. It's not even about Americans specifically. You could flip this entire script around and talk about Europeans confused in America, or Australians lost in Asia, or anyone from anywhere trying to navigate a place that works totally different from home. The thing is, Americans just happen to be really confident about it. That's the entertaining part. It's not malicious. It's just this fascinating mix of genuine confusion and absolute certainty that their way is the default way. And when reality doesn't match expectations, instead of quietly adapting, there's this tendency to assume something must be wrong with the system. I had one last guest before I moved jobs who perfectly summed up everything. She asked me, very sincerely, "Do you ever wish Amsterdam was more like America?" I said, "No, not really." She seemed shocked. "But wouldn't it be easier?" I asked, "Easier for who?" She thought about it. "For everyone." I told her it works pretty well for the people who live here. She nodded, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me. That's the thing about travel. You go somewhere expecting it to make sense to you immediately, forgetting that millions of people have lived there their whole lives, and it makes perfect sense to them. The restaurants aren't doing it wrong. The measurement system isn't a conspiracy. The quiet hours aren't personal attacks. It's just different. And different doesn't mean broken. But also, these moments are hilarious. The confusion on someone's face when they realize Europe doesn't cater to their specific hometown norms is genuinely funny. The confidence it takes to tell a Roman waiter that Italian food would be better with ranch dressing is impressive. The boldness to argue with a Norwegian librarian about noise levels in a library is almost admirable. So if you're American and you've done any of this stuff, don't feel bad. You're not alone. You're part of a long tradition of travelers who showed up somewhere expecting home and found something completely different. Just maybe, next time, Google the tipping culture before you leave a 50% tip and wait for applause. Or check if the metric system is a thing where you're going, or accept that bread and coffee is, in fact, a real breakfast. And to everyone who works in tourism and hospitality, I see you. I know you've got a story 10 times wilder than anything I've shared here. The job teaches patience, cultural awareness, and the ability to explain basic geography to confident adults. Keep fighting the good fight. I share stories like these every week, not to mock, but to map how culture shapes behavior. If you care about understanding people beyond borders, you'll fit right in here. These stories never stop coming. And honestly, I hope they never do.